What's going on, guys? Josh here from Polymathics, the YouTube channel that helps you become a modern day Renaissance man. And today we're talking about a topic that I really enjoy to research and develop, but it's related to writing, particularly fiction writing. And it does have several uses outside of that, particularly in psychology, but today we're going to focus on the aspect of fiction writing, particularly with characters, and that is archetypes. Now, some of you may say, well, what is an archetype? I don't know what that is. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a definition in my own words, and then we'll kind of talk about the two main archetypes. Then we'll finish up with some examples and references that you can use to do your own research and studies. So, with that being said, what is an archetype? I would say, in my own terms, you can look it up. There are several different definitions out there. But in terms of fiction writing, an archetype is a master character. Characters that we've seen throughout history, throughout all different stories, that pop up again and again. So, for example, when we look at 4 different movies, Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and The Hunger Games, we have the master archetype of the hero. So for example, Star Wars, it's Luke Skywalker. Lord of the Rings, it's Frodo Baggins, and you could even say Aragorn. In Harry Potter, it's Harry Potter, and in Hunger Games, it's Katniss Everdeen. So that kind of gives you a sense of what an archetype is by examples, but if I was to define it, I would say it's the psychological essence of a character. It's the way they think, or the role that they play. And we're going to discuss that in a moment. What an archetype is not is a stereotype, and a lot of writers, it looks like, that I've seen, particularly in stories that I didn't care for, they mix up what an archetype is with what a stereotype is. And a stereotype, again, everybody has their own definition, but I would say is more of an outer appearance. What a person looks like, or it's very superficial. And you know, the trash man, or the raging alcoholic, something like that. Like, it's a stereotype people assume, or the racist skinhead, or you know, like there's stigmas and biases that are associated, and it's normally about a group of people rather than a person. And that's what I would say is the difference. So now that you've kind of heard my definition, right? I believe Carl Jung basically said that archetypes are like psychological fingerprints of a character, right? Just like you could take a fingerprint and it's very unique to you, that would be a character's psychological fingerprint, is their archetype. So now let's talk about what are the two main types of archetypes. And in my mind, there's 2. Other people may expand on that or compress that, but I think the 2 main ones that I've seen, you have your role archetype, and then you have your psychological archetype, or your personality, your persona archetype. And there's definitely melding between these 2. But let me give you an example. The hero in basically any story, and this information is coming from one of the books I'm going to tell you about later, which is The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. Very, very good read. But the hero is someone who is given a call to adventure, accepts the call, goes out into the special world, kind of risks their life or their beliefs while they're out there to learn something new, to obtain a new piece of wisdom that maybe the world has forgotten or needs. And then that person then brings it back and shares it with the world, even at the sacrifice of themselves. If you look at all of the movies that I mentioned before, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, that all the heroes basically do that. Other role archetypes, aside from the hero, one of the the most familiar is the hero's opposite, which is called the shadow. And the shadow is essentially the dark side of the hero. Now, that's what that character represents. So in Star Wars, it's depending on which angle you're looking at, it could be Vader, or it could also be the Emperor. In Lord of the Rings, it's Sauron and Saruman. In Harry Potter, you've got Voldemort, and Katniss Everdeen, it's President Snow. So, and what it is that that role represents the opposite of the hero. It represents the thing in your story which is trying to be fixed, I guess you could say. So, for example, with Star Wars, the Empire has control, and it's all about it's a living system and a machine made of people. And throughout the whole story, Luke Skywalker and his crew are basically trying to break free of that system and explore freedom and intuition and things like that. So the villain or the shadow, which some people may also call the antagonist, they normally oppose the hero. Now, another way that you can look at just these two archetypes, there's several others, right? Another way you can look at them is the role that they play in terms of the story. And a really great place to look at this, I'll mention it again and I'll drop a link below, is called Dramatica.com. And in Dramatica, they say that the protagonist, or the hero, is the person who has the purpose, and they're setting out and they're driving the story. Whereas the antagonist is essentially the opposition of the protagonist. Their goal is to stop that progress from being made. So just right there, you can see there's roles being played, and there's certain psychological elements that when the reader or the audience sees these characters portraying or taking on these roles, that psychologically, subconsciously, they're empathizing, or they're relating with those characters in either a good way or a bad way. So the role of the archetype, and I'll pause right here and say the role of the archetype is so important for that reason. If you want your characters to ring true and resonate with an audience, you're going to want them to portray some of these roles, not stereotypes. So, what are some other archetypes real quick, and then we'll press on to the other major type of archetype. And that is, there's heralds, there's mentors. So in Star Wars, you've got Obi-Wan Kenobi. In Lord of the Rings, you have Gandalf. In Harry Potter, you have Dumbledore. And in Hunger Games, you have Haymitch. All wiser individuals, albeit maybe a little quirky at times, that give the hero tools and strategies to use when they go into the special world and they have to face the trials and tests that are there before them. So beyond that, there's also the trickster, there's the shapeshifter. You can look all of these up, and they're there's also Dramatica has two kind of unique ones that I think are very important, which is logic and emotion. And they're kind of, they're almost like that devil and angel that sit on your shoulders in some stories, where one is saying, hey, logic means that we should run, while the other person is saying, while the emotion side is saying, no, we should go and fight. So, and then there's conflict there. Well, if you have two characters who convey those messages, it can make the story very interesting, especially if they're part of the same team but don't always agree. That's called conflict. Now, the next type of archetype is a persona archetype, meaning it's not so much the role that they play, but it's the type of person that they are. And I have some really great books here to go into that, but essentially you have like your matriarch or your Amazon. Like, think of Wonder Woman. She's this very strong female figure who is a fighter and very athletic. Then you also have your, I believe it's called like the seductive muse. So this is your very sensual, sexual woman. Or you have the mystic, which is a male or a female who is very in touch with the paranormal or supernatural, or just in touch with the world in general, maybe a little quirky. If any of these characters sound like someone you're writing, that's why it's so important to look into this, because it can give you some insights into how your character has reacted in several other stories throughout time. For male characters, there's the king, there is the Joker or Jester, something like that. And I mean, there's multiple. There's the male messiah. There's a ton of them. So, and each one of these is going to carry a persona. And the difference between, if you were to ask me, what is the difference between a role archetype and a persona archetype? The main thing is this: a persona archetype is going to stay with that character for their entire life, no matter how many books you keep of them. Frodo is always going to be a little innocent, a little naive, but willing to get the job done. Whereas Gimli's always going to be a little gruff and rough around the edges. On the flip side, though, the role archetype is almost like a mask that a character can wear for a time, or maybe just for one story, and then put on another mask. Or they could wear multiple masks. For example, sometimes the goddess figure can also wear the temptress or the tempter mask. So, and as you explore this topic, you'll see that in several different stories, this is done very well. And a lot of times in really good stories, that's where they do the best, is someone who was trusted as, say, the mentor ends up also being the shapeshifter, or some other character, the tempter, that ends up thwarting the hero. And when you do that, there adds a layer of conflict and surprise, and whenever there's a twist or something like that, audiences love that. So, lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple books and a couple resources that you can look into. The first one, as I already mentioned, is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. He was a comparative mythologist, and he looked into the monomyth. It's a whole other huge subject that I have several videos about. But in it, he talks about archetypes. Now, he actually got many of these archetypes from psychoanalysis, which is a field in psychology that essentially Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung developed. And if you look into that, you'll also find a lot of information on archetypes. So that's book one. Now book 2 and book 3, they're both from the same author, which her name is Victoria Lynn Schmidt. And the first one is called A Writer's Guide to Characterization. And then the second one is called 45 Master Characters. And I love these books. Oh, let me pause here for a second. So this one is going to talk a lot about role archetypes. These two are going to talk a lot about persona archetypes. And the reason why I love them is because she gives examples by not only talking about different movies that, like, for example, she uses Spock as the example of a logical archetype, but also she has a mythological god or goddess as the representation of how she uses it. So it's really easy to remember, like Zeus, Poseidon, things like that. And then the last resource, I'll leave a link down below. It's called Dramatica.com. And their archetypes are a little different in terms of their names, but the roles are very similar. And I see a lot of ties with Joseph Campbell's work on archetypes there. So go ahead and check those out. At some point, I'll be releasing a matrix that has pretty much every archetype I know, and then their equivalents, and whether it's a role archetype or a different kind of persona archetype. So I hope this has been helpful and informative. Please like, share, and subscribe. Till next time, take it easy.